Hello learners, today we are going to be talking about influences on children's development. This is a part of our courses DEC 1 and CNCC 2 by the name Organizing Childcare Services. So, as I said, the topic is influences on children's development. After this talk, you will be able to explain the meaning of the terms heredity and environment and describe the complex roles of heredity and environment in influencing children's development with respect to the various domains, that is physical domain, motor, cognitive, language and socio-emotional domains. We have learnt about what the meaning is of these particular domains, and today we shall see how heredity and environment influences the development of the young child. Let's understand first what we mean by heredity. So, heredity is the biological process by which features, characteristics and traits are passed on from the parents to the child, that is from one generation to the next. Now, what is it that is responsible for these transmission? It is the genes. So, genes transmit these heredity characteristics from parents to children. On the genes are the codes of biological development of the individual. So, genes will determine at what time, at what stage will different body parts mature, at what stage will a particular part of the body or a particular organ will show its maturational development. That is all governed by the genes. Now, most of us have about 99% of the genes in common. That means that the human genome is the same for all people. And it is because of this that all of us human beings are different from, let's say, animals or plants. So, all humans will have 2 eyes, 2 arms, 2 legs, hair, all of that. But it is this 1% of the genes which are different in all of us that makes an individual unique. So, 99% of the genes, the human genes are same in all the people, and the small number which is different causes differences amongst each of us. So, as I said, we all have 2 eyes, hair, legs, but their shape, size, color, this will vary from individual to individual. That is the genetic difference between us. The commonality is that we all have these features. The difference is that how these features are, how they look and appear is different. Except for identical twins, no 2 individuals have the same set of identical genes. As we know, the identical twins are born by the division of a single zygote. So, it is a single ovum which has been fertilized and becomes the zygote. When that splits into 2, you have 2 identical twins. But when 2 ova are fertilized by 2 different sperms, then there are 2 different eggs. So, those children are also twins, but they are fraternal twins. Their genetic makeup is entirely different. So, apart from identical twins, no one else shares the same genetic makeup. Let us now understand what we mean by the term environment. So, environment refers to the external conditions that influence development. It is the environment that provides experiences to the child. We can consider the environment to be of 3 types: prenatal, perinatal and postnatal. Let us understand what each one of them means. Prenatal environment refers to the conditions which the developing fetus experiences in the mother's womb. So, the fetus is surrounded by the mother's womb and the conditions within it form the prenatal environment. So, this fetus is affected by the health of the mother. If the mother is unwell, is ill, the disease causing organisms or the medications that she is taking, they can be transmitted to the fetus through the placenta. The nutritional status of the mother affects the fetus. If the mother is not taking certain nutrients, the fetus won't get them either. The emotional states of the mother affects the fetus. So, whether the mother is depressed or is sad, it causes hormonal changes in the body and that affects the fetus. So, this is the prenatal environment. By perinatal environment, we mean the conditions present during the time of the birth process. So, if the birth is taking place in unclean or unhygienic surroundings, if there is a lack of a trained person to conduct the delivery, or if there are no medical facilities to take care of emergencies during delivery, this can cause ill health to the child who is being born and it can cause harm. Let us see what is the postnatal environment. This is the environmental conditions after birth. We can further divide it as physical and social environment. The physical environment includes all the ecological conditions, so the type of food available to the child, the quality of water, the climatic conditions, the natural resources, the living conditions, housing and living space, transportation available around the child, other infrastructure and facilities such as schools and hospitals. All of this comprises the physical environment. All of this will affect the child's development. The type of food, if the family, what is the access to the food resources, what are the type of living spaces that they are living in. All of these will impact the child's health and even the mental status. Social environment refers to the interactions with the people and the institutions and settings in which the child has these interactions. So the number of people in the household, whether there are grandparents or it's a nuclear family, cultural practices of the household, religion of the family, the education level of the parents, the income and employment status, because that will determine the amount of resources available with the family, safety and protection in the environment. All of these are aspects of the social environment, and all of this affects the child's development. So over the years, the perception about how heredity and environment influence our development, that has changed. At one point, researchers used to argue that heredity plays a major role. At another time, the argument was that no, it's not the heredity, it's the environmental experiences which have the major role. But now we understand that neither view is central. Neither of these views is correct. The issue is not whether heredity or environment influences development. Neither is the issue how much of the development can be attributed only to heredity or environment. So we are not talking about if I am tall, is it because of heredity or is it because of the food? We are not talking now on these terms. What we now understand is that both heredity and environment interact to influence various aspects of the development. And it is often not easy to separate the effect of the two, because the interaction is always continuous and complex. Let's understand it through an example. For example, a child, one of the parents is tall and one is not so tall. Now, if the child belongs to a well-to-do family, the child is also probably getting good nutritious food to eat. So, can we only say that the child is tall because one of the parents is tall? Maybe it's a complex interaction between the genes inherited from one parent, but also the type of food, which is the environmental factor, which has caused the child to be tall. This is what we mean when we say interaction. And one type of studies really helps us to understand the role of heredity environment, and that is the twin studies. As I had just said, identical twins share the same genetic material. So if we find some differences in two twins who are identical, we can say that this is because of the environmental factor. So twin studies really help us to make more clear the role of heredity and environment in children's development. Let us now understand how heredity and environment influence development by considering some examples from each area of development. So let us first understand about physical development. Now, our physical characteristics like height, weight, rate of growth, our physical features, the color of our eyes or the shape of our eyes, all of that is to a large extent determined by genes. You can't really change many of the physical features which you inherit. But environment also has an effect. Just as I was telling you just now, in the identical twins, if one of the identical twins has been seriously ill for a long time, then the child's height and weight may not be as in case of the healthy twin. The height and the weight gain may not be as in the case of the healthy twin. So over here we would be able to identify the environmental factor, because actually both have the same genes for height and weight. But if one of the twins who has been unwell doesn't achieve the same height, we can now see the role of the environmental factor. So even though all of these physical features or what tendency for height and weight we have, it is given as a part of our genes, but environment plays a lot of role in helping us to attain what is our potential or not helping us to attain what is our potential. Both the cases depending upon the type of environment that we have. Let us understand the role of heredity and environment on motor development. We know that all children begin to perform certain body movements at a particular time only and not before that. For example, children can sit only when they are around 6 months of age. No child can sit at 3 months of age. Similarly, children start to walk by the time they are 12 months or 1 year. Children do not walk. No child walks at 8 months or 9 months. So what this shows is that a child cannot perform a particular body movement or learn a particular skill till the child's muscles, bones and nerves are developed to a certain level. This biological readiness is determined by a maturational code which is embedded in our genes. So, acquiring motor skills is greatly determined by maturation. And I just discussed these examples. The fact that there is a universal sequence of motor development irrespective of the culture or country to which the child belongs, that also shows the role of biology. So whether the child is in India or in Africa or America, children will begin to sit only at 6 months of age. This shows the universal role of the human genes in achieving motor development. However, once again we can see the role of the environment. How? So let us say that by around 4.5 years a child is ready to learn how to ride a tricycle. But unless the child has a tricycle, he is not going to learn. Similarly, a child may be ready to learn swimming, but unless the child has been taught how to swim, the child cannot learn swimming. So environment has the role in the sense that it provides opportunities to practice. This is the role of heredity and environment in motor development. Let us now understand how these factors influence cognitive development. Let us see how heredity can affect cognitive development. There is a particular type of a genetic abnormality where, because of the absence of a particular gene, a particular enzyme is not produced in the body. This enzyme is needed for metabolism, and because it is not present, toxic substances start getting accumulated in the body, and that affects the nervous system, and this can cause intellectual disability. So this example shows us how genes can have a role in creating an intellectual disability because of the lack of a particular gene which creates absence of a particular enzyme in the body. Let us in this example only understand the role of the environment. Now, if this condition had been identified early in the child and treatment given by giving that enzyme from the outside, then the harm to the nervous system can be controlled and the child's intellectual disability can be prevented. So here we see how both heredity and environment interact. If of course that feature from the environment is not available, then the intellectual disability of the child will result. Let us take one more example to understand how cognitive development is influenced by a nurturing and stimulating environment. Now, there have been studies done on infants who are brought up in orphanages, and it's been found that in many cases an adult has to look after many children, many infants. And so in such situations the adults are not able to give adequate time to play, smile or talk with the infants. So the adult infant interaction is minimal, and it was found that the cognitive development of such infants was lower as compared to other infants of their age. Later, some of these infants were taken out of the orphanage and put under the care of other adults, where they got care, nurturance and attention. And it was found that the cognitive functioning of these infants, it really increased compared to the children who had remained in the orphanage. So what we understand from this is that in terms of cognitive development, heredity provides the potential for intelligence. It sort of sets the limits of intelligence, and it is the environment which determines how much of that potential we are able to achieve, how much of that limit we are able to attain. So you must have heard that most of us, we talk and we say that we are not even using 1/10 of the amount of brain power that we have. So that really points to the role of the environment. We all are intelligent people. In the normal curve, when it is the normal curve, most of the people will form within the average range of intelligence. But even here, many of us are not really able to achieve our potential because our environment does not provide us the stimulation that we need to really achieve our potential in terms of intelligence, in terms of growth and development of our intelligence and cognitive development. Let us see the role of the interaction of heredity and environment in language development. So, where do we see the role of heredity or genes? We see that there is a universal sequence in the stages of language development. So, all children begin to babble around 6 months of age. Most children speak their first word around the first birthday. Rarely does it happen before that. So, this shows that a certain maturational timetable is required for language development. When the organs associated with speech will become mature, at that time the child will show the various stages of language development. But along with it, we can also see the role of environment. We find that from the study of children who are hard of hearing. So, if a child has difficulty in hearing right from birth, we find that such a child begins to babble at 6 months of age, just like any other children, but gradually the babbling declines in the case of this child. Why? Because the child is not able to hear his or her own speech and is not even able to hear the speech of others. So, while the stage of babbling seems to be because of maturational readiness, but for the child to move forward from the stage of babbling and to learn to talk, the child needs environmental inputs, which means that the child needs to hear language. Now, if the child cannot hear language because the child has some difficulty with the hearing organs, then the child is not going to be able to develop language. So, the rest of the language development is not as if it will take place just on the basis of a maturational timetable. It needs inputs from the environment. Now, if the same child had been provided a hearing aid, if the hearing loss was detected and the hearing aid was provided, the child would be able to hear his or her own speech, and in that case the child's language would develop and the child would gradually catch up with others. So, we can see once again the interactive role of language in language development of heredity and environment. Let us come to the socio-emotional domain of development and see how heredity and environment over here interact. So, in this case, there are genes which do create a certain predisposition. That means they create a tendency for a particular type of socio-emotional response. Now, for example, one of the most common cases of this is the response of anxiety. Some of us are more anxious than the other people. Now, this person's tendency towards anxiety is a part of one's genetic makeup. So, if one person is more anxious than the other, we could look for the reasons in the genetic makeup of the person. But here too, the person who is highly anxious, that person can modify his tendency towards anxiety by, for example, taking to meditation. So, meditation here becomes an environmental factor which enabled the person to take control or take care of his anxiety. So, finally, how the person's anxiety will be manifest will depend both on heredity and environment. So, another person may be from the same family, same predisposition to anxiety because of the genetic factors in common, but one person takes to meditation and controls or manages the anxiety better as compared to another who does not take to meditation. So, this once again shows that while genes create a particular predisposition, how that predisposition will play out in actual life will depend on a lot of environmental factors. or maybe the life situation of a person who is prone to anxiety, maybe the occupational situation is more stressful as compared to some other person. So here the person already has a predisposition to anxiety. Now the environmental factor is also such that it is an anxious workplace, and so we see that the person is manifesting anxiety even more as compared to another person from the same family whose workplace is not such an anxiety creating place. So the interaction between both the things is quite complex. Now certain emotional disturbances are also hereditary and they are passed on from the parents to the child. But whether once again this will be manifested in the child or not will depend upon the environmental factors. For example, the tendency for depression. If the child finds an environment which is peaceful, conducive, tension free, that tendency towards depression may not be manifested in the child. On the other hand, if the environment is a source of stress, then that tendency towards depression could become manifest. So it works in both the ways. One of the very important factors, environmental factors in our social and emotional development is culture. So we would have seen that people from different cultures behave differently. That is because the different cultures have different expectations. So for example, in one particular culture, it may be stated that children should be reserved, they should be spoken to only when they are spoken, or in a particular culture the rules of behavior may be different for the girls and boys. It may be all right for the boys to talk loudly and laugh loudly, but it may not be considered okay for the girls to talk loudly and laugh loudly, and they may be expected to be submissive and obedient. However, in another culture it is quite possible that girls are expected to be independent and assertive. So once again, the experience of being a boy or a girl will be different in different cultures. This shows the role of environmental factors. Another environmental factor which influences young children is school, because the children spend a lot of time in school. So school also has a major influence on children's personality. These were just examples of two environmental factors which affect socio and emotional development. So we conclude by understanding that heredity and environment interact in complex ways to influence our development. And what causes one individual to be different from the other is both the things. Firstly, we all have genetic material that is unique to us, which makes us different from the other one. And secondly, we all also have a variety of experiences which are different. And even if the experiences are the same for two people, how these experiences will interact with our genetic material will be different. What impact that experience will have on me will depend on the particular genetic predispositions that I have. So we conclude this unit, and we have studied in this unit the meaning of the terms heredity and environment. We have understood environment to be of three types: prenatal, perinatal and postnatal, and we have understood that it is not a question of whether heredity or environment, it is not even a question of how much heredity and how much environment. The whole idea is, the whole point is that heredity and environment at every moment of our lives, at every moment of the child's life, are interacting to influence the development of the child in different areas. Thank you.